Hello. Today we're going to be taking a look at custom materials, how to bring them into SketchUp and how to edit them so that they will become what we call seamless textures. Because often the images that we bring into SketchUp from unknown sources or the internet or wherever we might have them may not have been designed to be used in 3D software. And when we use certain materials from the internet or from unusual sources, they're very unlikely to be a seamless texture. And you're probably wondering what's a seamless texture versus a non-seamless texture. So I'm going to demonstrate by bringing in a couple of materials that I've downloaded from the internet. I'm going to put a granite material on the countertop and a wood flooring material on the floor. So let's begin by importing one of those files first. So we'll start with the countertop, and I'm going to be putting this pink granite file into SketchUp, and in order to bring it into the scene I have some choices as to what type of image to be used as, and in this case I'm going to be using it as a texture. If I was using it as a standalone picture like a background or maybe a piece of art on the wall or something along that way, we would use an image texture, but in this case I want to use it to cover the surface of part of a model. So I'm going to import it as a texture, and since I've already selected it here I can just say import, and when I import it you can see that it's connected to my paint bucket. So all I need to do is go onto the face, and it can't be part of a group, it has to be an open group face so that I can apply it to that surface. So my recommendation is to start in a corner and then drag it out until it feels like it's about the scale that it might feel like in real life. So we can adjust the scale factor later on, but something around that size doesn't look too bad. So I'm just going to click there, and you can see then it fills in the rest of the surface. And what I was talking about earlier as far as seams go, if I zoom in on this, it's not too bad of a file, but you can see that there's what appears to be a line drawn right down the center of this face, as well as there's a line here, and every little distance it repeats over and over this kind of white bright spot in the material. So those are what we refer to as seams, and we don't really want to have that because it just looks mechanical and fake. So we want to be able to edit that. And the other material that I'm going to bring in for the floor is a wood flooring, so I'm going to do the same process. And once again I'm going to go to import and find my wood floor, and again make sure I'm on texture and import it, and I've created a surface which will be my floor, and the default size of it looks pretty close to what feels like the right scale. So I'm just going to double click, and that will once again just repeat the material over the entire surface. But this one's also very clearly a seamed texture. We can see a very obvious line down the middle of our planks, and if it's a truly realistic looking wood floor, we're not going to see that seam. We're just going to see random planks, and the repeating like of this white one white piece of wood, that can be a little annoying. So maybe when we're cleaning up the image in Photoshop we might try to reduce the impact of that bright piece of wood, sort of the outlier. Now when we are searching for a material on the internet, especially for something that's got a repeated sizable object like a plank of wood, I always recommend searching for materials that have more of the small individual pieces in the image. If I just quickly go onto the internet here, you can see what I'm talking about, in that these images have a few planks. This one has fewer. The more planks that we can actually get into the image, something like this one, or this one is good, or this one here is quite good. So the more variety or more pieces that we can get in our original parameters when we're searching, the better the material will look in our model. So okay, so now let's jump into Photoshop, since we want to clean up this material and make it look a lot more realistic, along with the granite countertop here. So let's just open up Photoshop, and the first material we're going to take a look at is actually the granite. Okay, so if you just look at it like this, it seems fine. You're thinking, wow, I don't see a seam. Well, that's because the seam happens along the outside edges. And in order to find out whether our material is actually a seamless material or if it's something that needs to be cleaned up, the way we can check that is by going up to the filter menu, down to the other, and then choose offset. And when we choose that, we can see once we put these sliders, we want to get the middle, the edge of the material somewhere in the middle of our document, and there it's coming along. There we go. So here's our edge horizontally here. I should say the vertical edge, and we've moved it to the center. And then moving our image vertically, we should be able to start to see, there it is, the horizontal edge as well. It doesn't have to be perfectly in the center, but it just works a little bit easier if we have that kind of cross, if you will, in the center of our area of our image. So we just click OK now, making sure that we've got wraparound selected, which it is by default. So we can now say OK to that. So there's a number of ways that we could clean this up, but one of the faster ways that I've found is to use the clone stamp tool. And the clone stamp tool is located directly below the brush tool. And when we use this tool, the way it works is we have a selected brush, and in this case I'm going to recommend we use a hard round brush as opposed to a soft round brush. And what we're going to do is the clone stamp tool samples an area of our drawing. We tell it where to sample from, and then it copies that into a different area of our drawing. So what we want to do is we want to use bits and pieces of this material and paint it over top of these lines to reduce their impact. And the way we tell Photoshop where to get that sample from is we hold down the Alt key, and that changes our cursor into this bullseye looking cursor, and then we just click where we want to sample from. And in this case it's quite random, so, and then we literally just start with short strokes. We can go over top of parts of our drawing, and you can sample from different areas if we don't want to have too much of the same thing repeated over and over. Okay, and you'll notice that the edge of my brush might be a little too hard, and I can adjust that by going up into the hardness setting and reducing it just to feather that edge a little bit so that it's not quite as abrupt of a change. But we don't want it too soft because then the image gets blurry. Okay, so again, we're just going to sample different parts of our image and paint over top, and we can use a smaller brush if we want to make it a little less obvious, the parts that we're copying. And we just get as close to the edge as we can without going over the edge. But you can see how just by randomly clicking and painting over these points that we are creating the illusion that that seam isn't there. And we can just do that in making sure that we haven't missed any spots, in this part of the seam over here could use a little touch up. Okay, so, and this area which looks a little foggy, if we find that that's not to our liking, we can cover over that with a different part of the drawing as well. So again, just some random clicks can help sort of reduce the impact of that blurry or foggy nature. Okay. We also might want to pay attention to things like this white fleck here, because that's the kind of thing it repeats over here that your eye is immediately drawn to it in this kind of a pattern. So it's not a bad idea to maybe paint over that with something just to sort of be less distracting when we're applying it to our surfaces. Okay, so that doesn't look too bad, and then we can test it to see how it looks by once again going up to the filter, offset, and just randomly shifting this. And if we don't see any obvious lines, then we've accomplished our goal. Okay, so so now if I save this as it is and reload that into our scene, that's one way of doing it. So I'll go back to SketchUp now, and to find that material in our model, we need to click on the little house icon, and that shows us all the materials that are in our model. Currently, all of these colors are associated with our friend over here, but here's our pink granite and here's our wood floor. So I could just bring in another version of that, or I can actually edit this one by selecting it and going to the Edit tab and re-browsing for this material, and I'll just click on the folder and it will take me back to the same location that it was, but it's been updated. So now when I put it in, now you can see how much better our material looks, and there's no obvious lines on it anywhere. And we can adjust the size if we feel, oh, that looks a little on the large size, so I'm going to take it down to maybe 30 inches, and it updates automatically to change it in proportion. If I want to change the proportions of the image, I would need to click on this little chain icon here, but that will sometimes that'll give us a distortion, which in this case it doesn't seem to be too bad. And so we can just keep adjusting it until we like the size of it, and then we can sample that and paint it back onto the surrounding edges so that we're using the correct file on all the surfaces of our model. Okay, so so that seems to have cleaned up our granite material quite nicely for the countertop. But now let's turn our attention to this wood material. So instead of just jumping into Photoshop with that material, the other thing that we can do is directly from SketchUp, if we've associated Photoshop or connected or linked Photoshop to SketchUp, we can jump right to it without having to launch Photoshop separately. And if you haven't got your Photoshop linked to SketchUp, the way we do that is we can go up to Window, Preferences, and in the menu on the left, if we go to Applications, we can click on the Choose button and then just point to it in our system when we need to find the Photoshop exe file or whatever image editor you happen to be using, and that will then connect the image editor to Photoshop, so that when we want to edit a material, so let's say we want to edit our wood floor, and we click on the Edit tab. If I click on this little icon next to the folder, what that does is it will take this file and open it in Photoshop for us. Okay, and so now we have that material sitting waiting for us to be edited. And once again, I'm going to check to see what kind of tiling effect that we have just by going to the offset, and you can see there's our obvious seam there. And vertical I'm not too concerned about because it lines up with our boards, but the horizontal, obviously I want to try and drag that over to the center a little bit more. Okay, so once we've got it arranged like that, so now in a situation like this, what we want to do is we want to get rid of this line, but obviously we can't use the stamp tool here because that's not quite the way to go about fixing this kind of a situation. So my recommendation here would be to actually go in with the rectangular marquee tool and select sections of our planks and paste them over top of these seams. So wherever I've got a large or a long board, and it doesn't have to be perfectly aligned edge to edge yet, so I'm just going to copy this, Control C and then Control V to paste it in. I'm going to take that up to a different part of my drawing, and I can resize it, and using the Control T function, I might want to zoom in on this just to try and make it fit the width that I need it to be, and also to cover up any planks at the other end. I might leave that little white highlight in there to make it feel like it is part of a plank next to it. This one feels a little bit too bright, so I might sample with the brush tool, and I'm going to pick something quite small and come over here, and using the bracket keys I'm going to reduce the size of my paintbrush to something like a 1 pixel, and I'm going to sample the color of that line, which is like a dark brown, and then zoom out a little bit to paint my shadow line across the end of that board, just to give it a bit more realism. Okay, and I'm going to repeat that process, and I can use that board more than once. So if I have this board and I click on it and use the Option or Alt key and drag it up to a new location, I can do something along these lines and have the same effect, and I can even rotate it or flip it if I don't like to make it feel exactly the same board repeated over and over. Okay, so and I'm just going to repeat that process until I've basically eliminated this center line of my image. Okay, so I'm going to pick now a different part of the wood, and I'm going to come over here, and I'm just going to, and you notice that I'm purposely not trying to match it exactly to the size of the board that's there. That way when I stretch it, it's going to feel a little bit different from the original. And one of the boards that I was complaining about is this bright one, so maybe this would be a good time to put a plank over top of that, and if I flip this around, bring it over and get it to match into those corners. And where I stop it at this end is completely random, and the more we don't have the ends line up, the more realistic it's going to look. And once again, I can repeat that board or use it again in another spot. Let's take it up here and shorten it a little bit so that we're close to that corner. Let's drag it up. And then to make the transformation apply, you just double click on it, and you can see how we're already making this seem a lot less apparent. And I'm just going to do that a couple more times, and we should be finished fixing our image. But just let me get these ones done. I don't need that long of a one, I think, this time. Copy that, paste it, bring it down over top of, not there, let's go a little bit lower so it's less obvious, and stretch it and move it into place. And just try to avoid having the ends of our boards too close together, which is the way it would be done if it was a real floor, so we might as well try and make it as realistic as we possibly can. And once again, I'm just going to paint a little line on top of my board here. 2 pixels might be a little big, but let's see how it looks. It's not too bad. I might even put a horizontal one in just to continue that line a little bit better. And that's helping it look a little bit more realistic. Okay, and let's see, I want to get this edge shifted somewhat because one of these anyways, these are all two, can't have three in a row, so it might be a good time to do something across this middle piece. And let's just bring that board down here. And I might rotate it around this time to make it less obvious. I could even reverse it. I can have a good effect. Just move it up so it's a little bit better aligned. Double click it. And you can see already probably the obvious tiling of this material. I'm going to fix these ones because I'm going to have 1, 2, 3 in a row. So probably, I don't think I have anything up there. No. So I'm going to put one more plank up around there, and maybe let's reuse this one. Zoom in so that we can see what we're doing a little bit better. It's always a good idea. And let's extend this so that it's not quite so short past that other plank. This is too short, but in the interest of time and not boring everybody, we can pretty much feel good about what we've done to that point. So, and now all I need to do is flatten this image. And so I go up here to my little menu bar here and just say flatten image and save it. Say OK. And now when I go back into SketchUp, you can see that the material has been updated and there's no obvious line or seam on our flooring. So that's how we can bring in a couple of different types of materials and update them in Photoshop to make our materials look a lot more realistic. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks.